Okay, so we have our list of albums that we made in the last video. It still doesn't look great because we're still just using the default styling from the browser. We haven't added any styling to our HTML yet. And we're probably not going to do that in this video just to keep things simple. But I do want to add some visual division between my albums. So I'm going to add a horizontal rule. I do that with the HR tag. And this is a self-closing tag, so remember I add the slash at the end of the tag. And then when I save, I should see just a horizontal divider show up between my albums. Now remember, each one of these blocks of code represents one of my albums, so if I want that to be added in between each of my albums, I have to add it to each one of those blocks of code. There we go. Also, I might want to add a label to the rating, so I just don't have this random number here, so I can know what that stands for. So let's say rating. Great, that shows up there. And again, I need to go through each one of these, make sure I spell it right each time, make sure I put it in the right place so that the display of my albums remains consistent. So that's getting to be sort of a pain. It's not that big a deal because I only have 3 albums right now, but you know, this could be the 100 best albums of all time or the 500 best. And then that would start to be a real big pain to try to go through that many individual blocks of code, which might be even bigger once they have the styling applied, and try to hunt down the place to add or change something for each one of those albums. So it would be nice if there were just an HTML tag for album info that I could add for each one of these and not have to worry about the specific structure of the HTML for each one of these chunks of code that represent my albums. I can add this to my HTML file, but when I save, nothing appears in my list because the browser doesn't know about this. This isn't a real HTML tag. The browser doesn't know what to do with it, so it just ignores it. Even if this were a real HTML tag, it probably wouldn't be exactly what we want. We might want a slightly different format for our album info, so we'd probably end up making our own structure anyways. But wouldn't it be nice if we could make up our own HTML tag? If we could just define a tag and say, we're going to make up an album info tag and we want it to represent this chunk of code. So every time I use this tag in my HTML, I would get this chunk of code. Wouldn't that be nice? Well, surprise, that's what React does. I mean, React is a huge beast that does a lot of things, but the core feature and the thing that we care about is that it lets us define custom HTML tags that we can reuse throughout our project. So let's explore a little bit how that might work. I'm going to copy one of these blocks of code into an empty file. And I'm not going to worry about writing real HTML or real React right now. I just kind of want to explore the concept of how this might work. So I would somehow say that I want to define a new tag called album info. And I want to somehow say that I want this album info tag to equal this block of code. So if I'm in my, let's say up here is my album info list or my album list, I could just type out that tag and get an album. And if I did it for all 3 of my albums, I would get my list of 3 albums. So that's sort of how that would work. But I wouldn't want it to output this exactly, right? Because this contains data for a specific album. So I wouldn't want to print the same album 3 times. I want to be able to change what's in there. So instead of having this album info tag represent this exact code, I would want it to represent a template that I could change. So instead of having the actual title of the album, I would say this is a placeholder for the album name. And here is a placeholder for the artist. Same thing for the date, the rating, and the image name. So now I would just need a way to get the specific album info into the template that I created that is represented by the tag. So we could reuse this convention that we see from HTML where we just add properties to the tag itself. So that might look like go up to one of my tags in my album list and just add the properties for one of my albums. So I would add the image, the name of the album, the artist's name, the date, and the rating. So now using this album info tag, I can set properties for a specific album. That data would get plopped into my template, and that would get output onto my web page. And so to list out the other albums in my list, I would just add the specific properties for those albums as well. So for each one, the only thing that really needs to change is the specific data that changes, the specific data that's different between each album. I don't have to worry about maintaining the same structure for each one of my albums because that's defined in my template. Now here I have a really simple template, so it's not saving me that much work, but you could imagine if this were more complex, that could be a big deal. And maybe even a bigger deal is that when I want to change the way that my album is displayed, change the structure of it, or if I had styling, if I wanted to change the styling, I would only have to change it in one place. I would only have to change the template. And then every album in my list, whether it's 3 albums or 100 or 500, those would all just get that update because they're all using the same template. So let's look at how this will actually work in real React. I'm gonna just copy this list of tags, and I've got a real React project running here. Let's switch over to it. So I only have the title right now, Best Albums of All Time. It's in an h1 tag, which is wrapped in a div. We should know what all that means by now, more or less. And I'm gonna just paste in those album info tags that we sort of made up in that other file. Luckily, we made them up in a way that React should understand. So let's see what happens when I save this and my page refreshes. React is saying it doesn't know what album info is, right? It's not a real HTML tag, so the browser doesn't know what it is. And we made it up, but React still doesn't know what it is because we never told it. So we need to tell React what our custom tag stands for. We need to tell it what the template is for that tag. So let's define the template for our album info tag. Don't worry too much about the syntax right now, but just know right now I'm defining our template. So I know our template needs to accept some data, and we know what those are already because we can see them listed here. So we need an image, we're going to use a name in our template, we're going to use an artist name, we're going to use the date, and we're going to use a rating. And now I just need to list out what the template is, again with a tiny bit of custom syntax. So this is just the template that I copied from our fakey fake file. Now it's real. And when I save, I get a list of albums that looks remarkably similar to the list that we typed out by hand. Great, so now what did that get us? I still have to list out each one of the albums as an album info tag, but now I only have to worry about changing the data that actually changes. I don't have to worry about maintaining this HTML structure each time. So when I want to add a new album, I can just add a new album info tag and change the specific data that's getting passed into the template. And I'll see that pop up at the bottom of my list. Now, more importantly is if I want to change my template, I only have to change it in one place. So if I want to add a label for the year to say published in. Now that will show up for each one of my albums because they're all using this same template. And I could even change this template to be something much more complex, like this code I have saved over here. I'll just paste that in. Don't worry about this, but this is basically the same structure with some styling applied. So now when I save, each album gets that template with this nice styling, and we have something that's actually starting to look like a real web page now. So don't worry about all this syntax right now. We're going to learn about that later. But we did just learn the core of what React is and what it does for us. It lets us create our own custom HTML tags. And then in our custom tag, we can define a template and then pass in the specific data to plug into that template every time we use it.